now take you to the broadcast of It's Time with Reverend Nathaniel W Martin. Here is Reverend Martin.
Brother Blackwell, I'd like to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, but never good night and never goodbye. I'm Reverend Nathaniel W Martin, the pastor of the New Life Institutional Baptist Church here in Los Angeles, California. And I'm grateful that you are looking at another episode of a program in which we've chosen the title, It's Time. It's time for equality. It's time for equity in our pay. It's time for environmental justice as well as always, economic and social justice. We take our marching orders from the scripture, two portions that resonate with me, one in the Old Testament and another in the New. Although you can find that all of the prophets and all of the books spoke against the same thing and cried out against it. But in Deuteronomy chapter 24, beginning at verse 14, it says, "Thou shalt not oppress an hired servant that is poor and needy, whether he be of thy brethren or of thy strangers that are in thy land within thy gates. At their day," that means when they finish working, "thou shalt give them their hire." That means pay them. "And neither shall the sun go down upon it, for they are poor, and set their heart upon it, lest they cry against thee unto the Lord, and it be sin unto thee." And the key words in here are not oppressing the poor, and which means that if you withhold money when it is due, then you're setting me back. You're holding me back. That's oppression. Funny thing about how God looks at the way we treat one another, isn't it? And so we must not oppress, because we find that the word oppress in the original Hebrew carries the force not only of deception, but also of extortion, because you're extorting my patience. You're forcing me really to be willing to take a little bit less in order to get some so I can go take care of some of my obligations. And God is not well pleased with that, according to the scripture. Remember back in those days, when the person finished, there was no weekly thing. When you finished working that day, you were supposed to give them their pay, their hire, what they was called, because they had to get to the store, had to get to the market, male or female. They had people waiting on them. They had obligations to fulfill. And so God is very much concerned with how we treat one another. Here, it talks about the hired servant and the poor and needy. And, hey, most of us are the poorest and certainly need the most. But God is concerned that we treat each other in a equitable, fair, and just manner. Our other scripture is from James chapter 5 and verse 4 in the New Testament, which says that, "Behold, the hire of those who have reaped down your fields crieth, and their prey, which is by you kept back by fraud, crieth. Behold, the hire of them that have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth." Let me get that right, since I don't see it here in front of me. "And the cries of them that have reaped are entered into the ears of the God of Sabaoth." So you see, and if you read that entire 5th chapter of James, you see that he really speaks out against the abuses that the rich were making of the poor. Remember, the poor are easily exploited because they don't have anything. They don't have what you have, or may not have what I have. Those of us who say that we are not poor. But the thing to remember is that we must be equitable, fair, and just. And that when I deal with you, I must expect you to be equitable, fair, and just, and honest, and respectful, and treat me with dignity. Because if we meet those prerequisites, then I think we can make it. Don't you? If we treat each other with respect, and dignity, then we won't cheat one another. You won't be lying to me at the end of the day, telling him, hey, man, I ain't got it. I done worked all day long, and you saying you ain't got my money? Help me, somebody. Let me not get started. So we have to practice treating each other right. I want to say hello to all of my friends that are viewing YouTube, Facebook, and otherwise. We'll get this together sooner or later. We are in a period of time when the United States of America is no longer the global bastion, shall we say, of democracy. We started out talking about democracy, but we seem to always settle only for capitalism. And believe me, capitalism is not democracy. Democracy is power to the people. And capitalism is just that, the exploitation of the many by the few. And so we are as a country, as a nation, are really demonstrating our hypocrisy. No other way to put it. You can use simple words like cognitive dissonance or dissembling, but hey, we're hypocrites when it comes to the practice of democracy in this world. As a matter of fact, much of our history outside of this country has been to suppress and restrict the spread of democracy, especially in our southern border neighbors right here in the North American continent, Nicaragua, Guadalajara, and other countries like that, not to mention Chile, come to mind, and not to mention Cuba. So we have a great deficit of a righteous expression or a righteous demonstration of equity and social justice in this North American continent. And so we have a lot to make up for. We found the report of the UN rapporteur on extreme poverty and human rights to be quite instructive. And I don't like to be reading a lot of things, but got so much rich stuff in here, it's hard to let it go. Notice, if you please, that in the United States, it's said that about 14% of Americans live in poverty. 14% of Americans live in poverty. And since the accession of the present occupant of the White House, Donald Trump, it seems that we have the reporter says that there is an extreme policy that makes a political choice. In other words, extreme poverty is now a political choice of those that are in power. So it's not by accident. It's not by necessarily a fault of the person who is poor, who has nowhere to stay. It is the policy of the country. And of course, going all the way back, as far as there has been economics and jobs in America, there has always been a tacit understanding that you could never have full employment in the United States of America because that would increase inflation. Even Greenspan was guilty of making that observation some years ago. You can go back and check it. He said it. Now, the reporter from the UN said that the concept of one man, one vote, which is the hallmark of democracy, is in danger of being left in the realm of mere theory and not a reality. And most of us who have grown up in the South, like I did back in the 50s and the 60s, we know all about being denied the right to vote. We know how long we had to fight and what was necessary, what you were subjected to in order to get the right to vote here in America. Remember, we've only had the right to vote. We, being black people, have only had the right to vote for just a little while in comparison to the age of the nation, the age of the country. We only got the right to vote in 1965, and here it is 2018, and every 10 years that Civil Rights Act has to be renewed by the President of the United States, and if he doesn't renew it, hey, you can't vote no more. And so the rapporteur, as he's properly called, from the UN, who was looking at extreme poverty in America. Can you imagine that? Looking at extreme poverty in America. When his report came out, it greatly incensed Miss Nikki Haley, who is the ambassador to the United Nations. As a matter of fact, they walked out of the United Nations Committee on Human Rights because it said that the committee was hypocritical. That's neither here nor there. But notice what the rapporteur says. He says that overt disenfranchisement of people to vote means that over 6 million people who are felons and ex-felons no longer have the right to vote. And this falls specifically hard on the black population of the United States, which has suffered a great history of criminalization based on drug policies, based on skin color. You take it for what it's worth. We are disproportionately disenfranchised from voting even now, just as we were back in the 50s and 60s. Remember that John Lewis said you had to be able to tell the man how many bubbles was in a bar of soap, how many jelly beans in a jar, all this type of thing, in order to keep the voting of black people to a minimum. As a matter of fact, if you were back south, you didn't vote at all. And it was common practice that if you went down to sign up to vote, you'd lose your job the next day. And since most blacks at that time worked on white folks' plantation, sharecropping and the like, or else worked in the white folks' home, and if they got word that you had went down and registered to vote, they might tell you, well, we don't need your work services here no more. And then you lost your job. Then if the man at the store decide, well, hey, you went down there to vote and you ain't working no more, we're not going to extend you no more credit. And so it was a very effective way in which blacks were prevented, hindered, stopped, and blocked from participation in the democratic process, which starts with your ability to vote for who represents you. You say voting is not important. Yes, it was, because else why would people like J.O. Eastland and Rankin and Bilbo and Robert Byrd and all that crowd make such a great fuss when they saw that the Negro was about to win his right to vote? Remember, most of those people were voted in illegally. They were not voted in by a majority of the population that lived in their states or in their district. They were voted in because they denied the voting franchise to over half of the voting age population, meaning black people. And as a result, they held a lock on all of the important committees. And how did that affect us? It affected us in Social Security. It affected us in housing. And you hurt me in Social Security and you hurt me in housing. And like that, you have really taken a sledgehammer to my hand, so to speak. And that was the importance and the power of voting, because the effects of the policies that were set in motion by these old-time conservatives, ultra-conservatives, who were the bulk of the Democratic Party at that time, we are still living under the legacy and consequences of those policies. And that's whether you live in California, or whether you live in New York City, or whether you live in Mississippi. You are affected by policies that were put in place by people that were voted into office that you had nothing to do with. And so voting is still extremely important. Believe me, we need to get registered and we need to vote. But let me continue with the report of the rapporteur on extreme poverty and human rights. He says in relation to gerrymandering. Now, gerrymandering is the ability of the people in Congress every 10 years or so to redraw districts so that Democrats say we got more Democrats in here, Republicans say we got more Republicans over here, so we're going to redraw the line, the districts like that. I mention that because artificial boundaries, artificial drawings of these redistrictings have affected the way that black people are counted in the districts. It is so subtle that you take such a powerful congresswoman as Maxine Waters, who was at one time lived in the middle of her district right there in Vermont Knolls, just the other side, just west of Vermont, and 83rd up in there. But yet in Congress, they redrew the line so subtly that all of a sudden she was living outside of her own district. She was 3 minutes outside of her district based upon decisions that the Republicans who were in power made in Washington, D.C. So you can get an idea just how important this redistricting, this redrawing of the lines of a congressional district can be. Not to mention that the fact that 3 different times Congresswoman Waters' district was changed. Originally she was in the 29th district, and then when she first went to Congress, then it was changed to the 35th district, and now she's in the 43rd district. What's up with all of these district changes? It shows the power of the people with the pen to redraw districts, to make their district stronger and your district weaker. They're doing their best to get Maxine maneuvered into a position where she would be voted out of office. And that is what the power of the vote is. That's why we need to continue to vote. In the 43rd district right now, where it was majority black, it is now majority Hispanic. Blacks make up only about 23-point-something percentage of the 43rd district, whereas the Hispanics, all of the Mexicans and everybody else, make up 46%. So you can see which way the trend is going. I was amazed when I went to a meeting down on the 109th and 110th at the railroad track there at the Ted Watkins WLCAC, that is no longer in Congresswoman Maxine Waters' district. That's been removed from her. She's not on the east side of Central. Her district is on the west side of Central. And so you see the power of voting and redistricting and why we have to continue to vote. But of course, that's not the only emphasis that we need to put on it, but it is certainly a great part of the puzzle of the program. All right. Now, the rapporteur went on to say that the imposition of artificially and unnecessary voter IDs. Well, you know about that now. If you don't have the right ID, you can't vote. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And most of us use our use our driver's license as identification to show that we are a citizen of the United States, and they look at it and they match your name up on the road, and you sign upside down and the like, and then you go and vote. But now a lot of people don't have driver's license, and once you leave the cities, this urban area, you start getting out in the rural, the elderly and others like that who have been living out there a long time and voting out there a long time, all of a sudden they're being confronted with new credentialing requirements. You got to have this or you got to have that. And you'd be surprised. Some people are not even able to show their birth certificate because they're so old and been around so long, and it wasn't a requirement. And it is creating havoc in the ability of the citizen to participate in the franchise. And who does this help? Why, it helps the rich. Certainly it does. It helps those who are interested in a fewer or lower number of people voting, because the fewer Democrats that vote, the more likely that the Republican challenger will get elected. So there's blatant manipulation of the polling station location. You're supposed to vote over here on Hardy and say whatever street, Hardy and Crenshaw, but they moved it. And they didn't tell you where they moved it to. And then you find out way over in the afternoon you're supposed to be up in Darby Park, just to use an example. These types of things. I know one time we went to vote at the regular place, and they had moved it, and they said, well, where did they move it to? And they had moved it to somebody's house. Hey, they do those type of blatant things in order to what? Suppress the vote. That's why it's so important that we pay attention to these things. Relocating the DMV offices or varying the hours that the DMV offices is open in order for you to get an identification. All of these things impact the voting of the poor. There seems to be a systematic deprivation of the poor person's right to vote. This is put out by the UN, like I said, the UN Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights. You can download it yourself, but it is vitally damning of the way that American democracy has devolved. Instead of getting better and being more inclusive, is getting worse. Also, the rapporteur talks about the illusion of full employment, which I mentioned to you back earlier in this episode, that in 1996, some of you were around at that time, remember Bill Clinton talked about changing welfare as we know it, and in order to get welfare, you got to work, and you got to get off welfare and go to work. Well, a lot of people bought into that. They were glad to go to work. But when they got off of welfare, the people that were paying the salaries in the workplace reduced the salary. Some people working for $2 a day. How you going to make it on $2 a day? And that's in 1996, you see. And the job picture that has not improved from then to now. It actually has gone the other way. Don't forget that we have a huge recession in 2007, of which we have not fully recovered. And because of artificial intelligence, it means all the robots and all that type of thing coming in, that if you don't have a certain level of experience, certain level of education, then you really are not desirable to have you in the workplace. And that is what is the wall that the poor are running up against more and more, is that, yeah, you want to work, but don't nobody want to hire you because of various and sundry excuses that they're able to hide behind. Not to mention that a lot of us, when we go to take the drug test, you got drugs in your system. not going to hire you. All right? Get a good job out here in Los Angeles and California, you got to have good credit. How you going to have good credit if you ain't got no job? Talk to me, somebody. And so you see how the deck is stacked against the poor all the way around. And so these obstacles that are put up against us, because all of us are trying to do what? Earn a living. And if you can't earn a living, honest living, then that means you're falling further and further behind and lower on the economic pay scale and in society, until finally you what? Pushed out under the freeways, and you're staying in the riverbeds, and you're sleeping on the sidewalk, and the police, you got a car and you're sleeping in the car, or you got a pickup truck and you're sleeping in the pickup truck, or you got a RV or motorhome and you're sleeping and living in there. But then here come the police. What do? They take the car. Now you got nowhere to stay, nowhere to live, and things just snowball. And this is what our society is doing to people more and more. Again, I mentioned the fact that a lot of people that are working are not making enough money to get off of all of the supplemental nutritional programs that help to keep them going. And that's with a job. Like if you're working at Walmart, you still need to be on welfare. So welfare supplements Walmart. Walmart is the richest corporation in America. Walmart fought desperately and invested heavily to get the current tax reform bill passed through, because Walmart plans or serves to make, or intends to make, or is in line to make billions and billions of dollars in profits because of what? Reduced taxes. Don't forget that a lot of these billionaires and banksters have money parked offshore. They're not in just the Cayman Islands. They got other places that they got that money, and they want to bring that money back into the United States, but they don't want to pay taxes on the money. And so with Donald Trump giving them the $1.5 trillion tax cut, now they can begin to repatriate that money to themselves here in the United States of America. But like I said at the last episode, if the rich do not pay their share of the tax burden, then if you make $1.5 trillion tax cut, because that's trillion with a T, something we never can't even conceive of, then that means that long fall, that's not a shortfall, has to be made up somewhere else in the budget, because if the people who are supposed to pay the taxes ain't paying it, then that means somebody else must pick up the slack. And guess who that somebody else is, and guess how they do it? They got a $1.5 trillion cut equal to the $1.5 trillion cut in Medicare. That's equal to the $1.5 trillion cut that they made for the rich in the tax reform bill. See how they're doing it? They balance the budget on the backs of, you guessed it, the poor. And so you can see that we are consistently having to fight the oppressor to get a modicum, a minimum of what we're supposed to have as citizens of these here United States of America. Is that right? And so you see the necessity of all of us being in this fight together. And they give you that old bromide, if you work hard, you're going to make it. Look, we work for 250 years of unrequited toil, labor right there in slavery. If that don't cut it, you ain't going to make working hard, ain't going to get it. Again, I say to you, we need reparation. We need reparation. We need to get paid for the 250 years of slavery. Again, I'm Reverend Nathaniel W Martin. I say to you, if they don't pay you, don't work for them. God bless you. God keep you is our continued prayer at all times.